Thank you for having me here today. The first thing I want to talk to you about is one of my earliest memories. And that's actually of me having a terrible flu, cuddled up in a lawn chair in the back of a classroom. And it was because my mom was a primary school teacher. I had gotten sick and she had nowhere else to leave me, so she took me to work. And it was very interesting to see that she had taken on this job of teaching because her parents had told her, as a teacher, you know, you'll have a lot of time to look after your kids after work because teaching is just a half-day kind of job. It's not so stressful. And you can go home and look after the household and, clean up and still, be a very present mother. And it's actually very interesting how in the 90s, there was this perception that being a homemaker or being a teacher were easy jobs. These are two tasks that are very, very much based on care work, on looking after people, on nurturing people. So this is what I'd like to talk about today. Unpaid care work and how it's frequently seen as women's work and how it disenfranchises women. So let's talk a little bit about women in the workforce in Malaysia. We actually see girls at 55% of university graduates. Girls consistently outperform boys in school, including in STEM subjects, which is actually, I think, one of the leading nations in ASEAN for this statistic. However, we only have 6.29 million women in the labor force. So our labor force participation rate is 55.2% as compared to men at 81.7%. So you can see there's a huge discrepancy there. And the third thing that's very, very troubling is that labor force participation peaks at 25 to 29. And then it sharply, sharply drops. It is a single peak, which means that women enter the workforce very steadily, and then after 29, they all drop off. So let's find out why there are barriers to labor force participation specifically for women, right? The first thing is a maternal wall bias. Now, this is when you go for an interview or you speak to your employer and they immediately think, hey, this person, even though they're eminently qualified, is 25, 26, they have a serious boyfriend, or they just got married, they're going to get pregnant soon, they're going to take maternity leave 90 days, they're going to spend some time with their kids, they may not even come back to work, or if they do, they're going to be distracted. So employers are actually psychologically discouraged from hiring women because of this. There's also a lack of equitable career growth, which actually stems from a maternal wall bias, because women feel like, hey, there aren't many options for me, there aren't many opportunities for me, especially in higher positions in the C-suite. Why should I bother? I might as well stay home, let my husband bring home the dough, and look after my family, which is also valid. There's also the issue of discrimination. As we know, we only recently passed the sexual harassment law in Malaysia, and there are a host of other laws that have just made it very, very unfriendly and uncomfortable for women in the workplace. Finally, it's care work. It's the cultural duty of women to look after their children, to look after their families, to look after the household, to look after aging relatives. So in a World Bank survey from as recently as 2019, women actually reported leaving their jobs due to a lack of childcare support, high transit costs in accessing the support, or just not having trust in the childcare support around them. So let me break that down. That means either the daycare around me is too expensive, getting to the daycare, so maybe there is a good daycare around me, but getting to the daycare costs too much or is too difficult. I have to be at work at like 8:30 in the morning. How am I supposed to drop my kid off in time? Or there are daycares around me, but they look dodgy. I don't want to drop my kid there for the whole day, right? I've only got a couple, and it took a long time to make. So the World Bank estimates that the number of absent women, that's what they call them, women who could be in the workforce, who are expected to be in the labor market given our relatively high level of development, ranges from 500,000 to 2.3 million. That's a very, very large amount given how many women are doing so well in universities. The issue with this is that it actually impacts growth, it impacts national growth, it impacts national revenue, it impacts women itself in that they do not have the right to choose. Let me talk a little bit about what constitutes care work before I go into these factors. So I'm quoting from a report done by Khazanah some time ago, and my friend Naziha actually worked on it. And she phrased it really well. She said, care work nurtures society. So let's think about that. It nurtures society, not an individual, but a community, a society, right? It supports your economic efforts. It pushes a nation so that the nation can do what it needs to do to function. And it can be as simple as staying home to teach your son to read, or looking after your aging parent, or making sure your household runs smoothly. But like many things that are nurturing, like nature or entertainment, you can't really put a quantifiable value onto what it means to you and what it brings. But it does, however, put undue pressure on women as they face what's called a second shift. So remember when I talked about my mom teaching and then going home and then cleaning the house? So you leave your work, you clock out, you go home and there's more work. It's a second shift, it's a second job essentially. This one's unpaid. Care work is unpaid work. Women are expected to look after the household, look after children, look after their parents, or look after aging relatives without it being considered labor. So this phenomenon of unpaid care work is gendered. It's very cultural. You see a lot of it, especially in the region in Southeast Asia, where there's still these slightly regressive attitudes towards women and empowerment, and it cuts across all ethnicities. So I want to talk a little bit about why unpaid care work and putting this pressure on women, whether or not they choose to take on two jobs, i.e. their real job and unpaid care work, as a second shift, or leave the workforce entirely, is an issue. Firstly, it leads to lower household income, and that has long-term implications on things like your health, right? Your ability to buy health insurance, on your financial well-being in terms of your retirement savings. It also has economic impact on the entire nation. Your national growth is impaired. A lot of women who leave the workforce end up starting small businesses from home. This means national revenue is diminished because there's no tax if you start up a very, very small enterprise. And of course, there is the question of the freedom to choose what you want to do and the right to dignified work. The first thing we can look at is early childcare. We need to be able to give these women access to quality childcare services rather than what we currently have. So right now, our childcare is not sufficient to service all the children who are in this, either in urban or rural areas, but it's worse in urban areas, actually, surprisingly. The other thing is that a lot of our childcare is custodial, in that they don't teach reading, they don't teach writing, they don't teach any sort of skills that are developmental. They are just custodial, in that you drop your kid off, they get a meal, they get nap time, they get television, and then you pick them up later. There's also very little inclusive childcare geared towards neurodivergent children or children with specific learning disabilities. Now, in a lot of other nations, you are able to find out if your child would be accustomed to school, adapt to school very easily from these young ages because of early childcare. We do not have that, which is why a lot of children, when they enter school for the first time, struggle. There also is a shortage of professionally operated centers, meaning that if you want an accredited childcare specialist to be looking after your child, you're probably going to have to paying top dollar. The other thing that can be done, besides putting in better childcare, is we can have flexible hours for women. So this is not a new thing. A lot of private sector companies have started this, but there's also been an emphasis post-pandemic on returning to the workplace, which means that women are now asked to leave their homes, leave their children in the morning, scramble to look for childcare, go to the office, leave at 5:30 p.m., pick up their kids somehow from their parents' house or from their daycare center, and then carry on the work of a homemaker. So if we were able to have flexible hours, then it would really encourage women to be able to juggle these things more effectively if they chose to do so. The third policy change that we could do is increase parental leave. Malaysia recently increased maternity leave to 98 days for the private sector and 90 days for the public sector. This is really good. That means we're no longer the least generous in the nation. We are actually on par with some of the best. In the region, we are on par with some of the best. I think we only lag behind Cambodia, which has about 120 days. So we could increase parental leave for men as well. Right now, paternity leave is only 7 days, up from 3 previously. It was only recently tabled and passed. So 7 days already shows the bias towards having one parent take on most of the responsibility for their child. If we increase paternity leave to anywhere between 30 to 90 days, and that which could be taken at any point, then we would be able to see a lot more shared responsibility within a household and a lot more fair division of care work. Finally, we should look to drafting and passing a gender equality bill. This was debated as early as 2018. It was, last news I heard was that in 2020 it was still being drafted. And well, we are still waiting. So once we pass some sort of gender equality or anti-discrimination bill, we will see employers bucking up and being less flippant, perhaps, with how they interview and treat women in the workforce. Currently, we've passed the Sexual Harassment Bill, the Sexual Harassment Act, sorry. Anti-Stalking Act has been passed, and we see these are really, really good progressive moves, and we hope to see this bill passed too. Okay, well, first thing is, yes, my mom is much more attractive than me, but I just want to underline the fact that I'm not saying we have to increase labor force participation rate at any cost. The goal is actually to increase good opportunities for women and to unlock the freedom should they want to choose to work, right? And I actually became interested in this because of all the stories I'd heard from my mom about how she had to juggle both jobs, right? Being a mom and being a teacher and looking after other people's kids and then coming home and looking after your own kid. At my institute, ISIS, we decided to come up with a survey to speak to mothers who were juggling this exact same thing. And when we had a focus group, we had the idea of giving out vouchers as a thank you. And I got into this big debate with my research partner saying, like, what kind of vouchers should we give out? And I was like, oh, we should give them like manicure vouchers or, you know, like a spa day. And my colleague was like, no, we should give them like giant or grocery vouchers so that they can go and buy more goods for their families. So of course, this turned to a huge debate. And I called up my mom and I'm like, which would you prefer? Like when I was young. She was like, oh, I would definitely prefer the spa day. But that actually happened to me. I got given like a ridiculously expensive spa getaway voucher and I had to give it away because I had no one to look after you. I was like, so you see the problem is very cyclic and it's not going to end anytime soon. So my mom had me when she was 24. That's very, very, very young. Like I think some of you in this lecture theater are approaching that age. So many sacrifices, there was a lot of unpaid care work, there was a lot of emotional labor, and the thing is, it's a cross-generational thing. I'm sure many of your mothers have similar stories of the choices they had to make on whether they wanted to juggle work and motherhood or stay at home and give up their careers. So the question now is what can we do so the next generation of women, including us, don't have to make the same difficult trade-offs and don't have to answer these questions with solutions that are not really what they need. Thank you.